stay tuned till the end of the video for a special announcement. In this video, we will be discussing how strong is the Godzilla from the GMK movie Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All Out Attack. Toho once again resuming the tradition of having every Millennium movie be set in its own continuity, with this movie being an alternate sequel to the original 1954 movie, just like Godzilla 2000. While it's never directly stated in the movie itself when exactly this takes place, numerous statements put it roughly around a half a century after the events of the 54 movie. I mean, if you take the 50 years statement literally, then the movie would take place in 2004, although Wikizilla, for whatever reason, seems to think the movie takes place in 2002, which, seeing as how a lot of Godzilla movies lately take place a year after the year the real movie releases in the real world, I'd say 2002 is probably the most likely date. Towards the beginning, the human characters make reference to the 1998 TriStar Godzilla movie, confirming that both movies take place in the same universe, which just has more questions than answers. Like, okay, if the original 1954 Godzilla movie happened in the TriStar timeline, then how the heck does the rest of the world not know about Godzilla? Possibly because Japan itself was so traumatized by the event that they've just been trying to sweep all evidence of it away. And it seems to have worked to some effect because, well, most of the people that were around back then are no longer alive. In fact, some people in the movie don't even believe Godzilla was real to begin with, and how this new Godzilla emerges is due to spirits being angry at people for forgetting what they did during World War II. So I'm gonna get this Godzilla out of the way right now. This Godzilla is basically a creation of vengeful spirits of people who died in World War II fighting Japan. That's right, we have a literal demon Godzilla, or spirit Godzilla. When you really think about it, this is probably the closest we get to having an actual ghost Godzilla, which was an original idea proposed for the final Heisei Godzilla movie before we ended up with Godzilla vs. Destroyer. There seems to be a bit of a misconception among the Godzilla community on whether or not this is just simply the original 1954 Godzilla brought back to life, or if it's a new entity that just for whatever reason just happens to be Godzilla. Another thing I want to point out about this particular timeline is that the human characters also make reference to the animated Godzilla series, as following the events of 1998, numerous monsters started popping up all over the world. This might inadvertently have confirmed the canonicity of the animated Godzilla TriStar series. And yeah, Toho knew about the animated series, as they included it in one of their guidebooks. Godzilla makes his presence known when he attacks a nuclear submarine and apparently absorbs power from it. This would, logically speaking, give this Godzilla a power-up, and for all we know, he could have just simply been the same height and weight as the original Godzilla until he absorbed the energy from this nuclear submarine. Since we don't really get a good look at him prior to his absorption of the nuclear submarine's energy, I can't really say for sure how strong he'd actually get from this, or if he gained any significant power at all. Later, our main human characters uncover that there were 3 guardian monsters who, for some reason, were slain by ancient humans, and for some bizarre reason, said humans decided, hey, even though we killed these 3 giant monsters, we should worship them. And so they built like statues and whatever to honor them. And apparently, according to legend, they're supposed to be asleep for another like 10,000 years. It's been 2,000 at the time the story takes place. The 3 monsters depicted are King Ghidorah, Mothra, and Baragon. So yeah, in a weird twist of fate, we have a heroic King Ghidorah and an evil Godzilla. And what's even more interesting is that this King Ghidorah is supposed to have 8 heads when fully recovered. However, as we will see later in the movie, he only has 3 of his 8 heads recovered by the time he's woken up. And since the legend stated that they were supposed to be asleep for 10,000 years, not the 2,000 that they actually got, we could use this as reason to believe that all 3 monsters are a bit handicapped in power going in to fight Godzilla. I think the most interesting part about the Guardian monster's backstory is how the heck did humans manage to kill the 3 with technology from like 2 AD? Yeah, that's probably the biggest plot hole from this entire movie. Eventually, Godzilla makes his first true appearance, and my goodness, this thing is evil. He intentionally goes out of his way to attack humans running in panic on the ground, and even does a fake out where he walks by this one lady who's in the hospital's room before suddenly hitting the room with his tail, passing by. He also fires his atomic breath at a crowd of people on the ground and produces a mushroom cloud. Okay, that's a bit overkill. Soon Godzilla comes into conflict with the first guardian monster, Baragon, and despite Baragon biting down on Godzilla's arm, he's able to easily lift him up and throw him around with just one arm. And Baragon weighs 10,000 metric tons. He just sends Baragon flying with his tail smack. Baragon doesn't do very good. He's literally getting curb stomped by Godzilla before trying to escape by climbing up a cliff, but Godzilla knocks him down and then vaporizes him with his atomic breath. There's nothing left of him afterwards. Later on at night, Godzilla faces off against a bunch of jets, and according to Wikizilla, these are F-7J fighter jets, ported version of the Shenzhou J-7, which itself is based off the Soviet Nyokian Gurevich MiG-21, which is literally classified as a supersonic jet and interceptor aircraft. Godzilla is able to shoot down these supersonic jets with his own atomic breath, which various calculations from the Versus Wiki have estimated the speed at which Godzilla's atomic breath fires out to be anywhere between Mach 1.6 to as high as Mach 8.5, which would put Godzilla's atomic breath in the supersonic to hypersonic range. Mothra is the next monster to take a shot at Godzilla, and this Mothra, besides also looking quite skinny and almost skeletal in comparison to previous Mothras, has a special ability where she fires out these poison spikes, though all they seem to do is really irritate Godzilla, and he manages to knock her out with a single hit of his atomic breath. Then Ghidorah shows up, and to show that he is really half big, not only does he have less than his total 8 heads, but also, despite having wings, he's not able to fly, which might explain why it took him so long to get to the battlefield. He manages to tussle with Godzilla for a bit using some kind of electric bite ability, though Godzilla does some biting of his own and manages to draw blood from King Ghidorah before easily throwing the 25,000 metric ton monster through the air, and knocks him out with a single use of his atomic breath. I should also mention before this, Mothra tries to intervene and rescue Ghidorah, but gets rewarded with a tail slap from Godzilla when he's not even looking in her direction, proving that this Godzilla has eyes in the back of his head. He's about to fire on Ghidorah a second time, but Mothra swoops in and takes the blow herself, getting knocked back for her troubles once more. The humans launch these drill missiles at Godzilla, and while you can see them kind of chip away at his skin, they ultimately explode before they really manage to do any piercing damage. Mothra attempts one final attack on Godzilla while still being on fire, mind you, and Godzilla just spins around and vaporizes her with his atomic breath. I want to point out that it took one atomic breath to vaporize Baragon, while it took 2 atomic breaths to kill Mothra. So that gives you an idea of the power difference between Baragon and Mothra. What happens next is what I can only describe as an anime moment, as Mothra's life force flows into Ghidorah, reviving him, and epic music starts playing as he ascends up into the sky, is declared by a human character as 1,000-year-old King Ghidorah, getting the king back in Ghidorah's name, even though it should really be 2,000-year-old King Ghidorah, blocks Godzilla's atomic breath with a big shield thing, and fires said shield thing at Godzilla, sending him flying back into the harbor, finally managing to do damage to the once thought invincible King of the Monsters. We see the damage on Godzilla's skin, and as King Ghidorah pursues him over the bay, he manages to drag him underwater, where a lengthy underwater battle happens most of the time off screen as the human characters devise a plan to launch a missile from a submarine into Godzilla's womb. When they fire the missile at him, Godzilla, showing off his big brain, manages to maneuver Ghidorah into the way so that the missile latches onto and explodes on him, knocking him off of Godzilla, allowing him to fire at him with another atomic breath, knocking him out cold, until the human drops a statue thing into the ocean, which releases energy which powers King Ghidorah back up. I should point out that prior to this, King Ghidorah had lost his golden glow, but gets it back upon getting the spirit energy. King Ghidorah then fires his gravity beams at Godzilla, which seems to be doing damage at first, until Godzilla pulls a Hax ability out of his ass, somehow absorbs the energy from King Ghidorah's gravity beams, combining it with his own atomic breath to form the gravitational atomic breath, and manages to destroy King Ghidorah with one shot. Not total vaporization, however, as we see chunks of King Ghidorah's remains raining down into the waters. However, upon death, the spirits of all 3 guardian monsters combine together to drag Godzilla back down into the ocean depths below, allowing the human character to pilot a submarine into Godzilla's mouth, where he manages to shoot a drill missile thing from the inside, causing a hole to erupt in Godzilla's chest, and when he later surfaces, realizes and tries to fire his atomic breath, it literally just shoots out of the hole in his body. And Godzilla, despite showing big brain moments earlier, decides to keep doing this until eventually the energy buildup is too much that he explodes from the inside out. So yeah, this movie was pretty good, I'm not gonna lie. Really good monster action. Not surprising when you consider the same guy who made this was also responsible for the Heisei Gamera trilogy, which was basically considered that franchise at its peak. Anyway, moving on. So how strong is the GMK Godzilla? Well, you can look at it in multiple ways. Because the original 1954 movie happened in this universe, whether or not this version of Godzilla is the same, just resurrected through vengeful spirits, or is simply based off the original 1954 Godzilla, either way, he should in theory scale to that Godzilla in terms of power, which means he would be roughly island level. Though given the height and weight difference, I would put him at about 1.2 to 1.5 times stronger than him physically, just simply because if these two were to get into like a wrestling match, the one that's like the bigger and heavier one would have an easier time pushing around the smaller, lighter one. His little mushroom cloud feat has been calculated to be 346 megatons, which is mountain level, based off Baragon's height and weight. His ability to vaporize him in one shot of his atomic breath was calculated to be about 836 megatons of TNT, which is in the high mountain level. The speed of his atomic breath, as mentioned before, was calculated to be between Mach 1.6 to Mach 8.5, so supersonic to hypersonic, as he was able to tag jets which move at supersonic levels of speed. Vaporizing Mothra actually gets him up to 1.25 gigatons of energy, which is large mountain level, and being able to vaporize King Ghidorah gets him to 346 megatons of TNT, which is mountain level. Of course, this is assuming that his atomic breath is the same temperature as the Showa Godzilla's atomic breath. An alternative calculation gets it up to 2 gigatons, which is also large mountain level. So yeah, it really depends on exactly how hot is this Godzilla's atomic breath compared to the original. Bare minimum, they're the same, which, yeah, gets into the mountain level in terms of attack potency. Based off the size of the atomic breath itself when Godzilla's firing it at King Ghidorah's shield, as well as these battleships later in the movie, Godzilla's atomic breath has also been calculated to be, in these specific instances, ranging from 92 megaton if it's at the same temperature as Showa Godzilla's atomic breath, to 58 gigatons if it's as hot as the Heisei Godzilla's atomic breath at 500,000 degrees Celsius. It also has an alternative calculation, which, based off some obscure Japanese guide image, apparently cites Godzilla's atomic breath temperature at being at 100 million degrees Celsius. Yeah, I somehow doubt it's that hot. I should point out the calculations used for vaporizing the 3 Guardian monsters also, for some strange reason, have like 100,000 degrees Celsius, even though the person specifically stated they were using the 100,000 degrees Celsius measurement. Regardless, this Godzilla's got a comfortable amount of mountain to even large mountain level feats. But if we are to assume that he is an improved version of the 54 Godzilla, then he should already be at least island level, to possibly large island level if we include the upgrade with his gravitational atomic breath. However, seeing as how he needed another monster's energy to reach that level of power, I'm not going to count it as his own natural power. Because he would theoretically scale to the 54 Godzilla, he should already have naturally transonic reaction speed, the speed of his atomic breath getting anywhere from supersonic to hypersonic, and seeing as how he was able to tag supersonic jets, I think it's safe to say he would have to be at the bare minimum supersonic. The Versus Wiki also had a theory whether he would technically have infinite stamina due to basically being made up of spirits, though if that's the case, I question why he bothered to absorb energy from a nuclear submarine at the beginning of the film if that was the case. Regardless, he does seem to be able to fight for a long period of time, as he manages to fight multiple battles back to back. And of course, like the original Godzilla, he should have at least human average levels of intelligence, not only because he actively sought out humans, the strategies he incorporates in his battle against other monsters, but also because if he really is made up of a bunch of human spirits, then shouldn't he theoretically have at least their level of intelligence? The thing is, this Godzilla only gets up to the island to island plus level, again, if you use the logic that he should scale above the 54 Godzilla. Without that logic, however, if we were to just say he was simply based off the 54 Godzilla and has to get by on his own feats in the movie itself, then he's only like mountain to large mountain level if we're lowballing him. Regardless, I'll put him at island level for now. Overall, this Godzilla is pretty impressive, and is generally considered to be the most evil Godzilla in the franchise, mainly based off, his own origins of creation, as well as just this petty moment with the hospital girl scene. I will, however, say his biggest weakness seems to be his seemingly lack of regenerative abilities, as he had that wound from King Ghidorah's shield attack for quite a long time, and he wasn't able to heal it fast enough to prevent his own death. For all we know, he might not even have any regenerative abilities, at least not on the same scale as most Godzillas. With that being said, join me next time as we begin to cover the One Millennium Godzilla movie that managed to get a sequel, the Kiryu series Godzilla, covering both the movies Godzilla against Mechagodzilla and Godzilla Tokyo SOS. See you next time, folks. Take care.